After 5 years of caring for my bedridden mother-in-law, what she said behind me broke me. Dear viewers, join me as I narrate my story. But before I proceed, please kindly hit the subscribe button, like and share this video to your loved ones. Thank you. Now to my story. My name is Eleanor James. I am 42 years old. Before she got sick, Margaret and I had what you'd call a respectful distance. She was my husband Thomas's mother. Proper, opinionated, hard to please. We never argued, but there was no warmth either. Just that tight British civility that often masks discomfort. She visited on holidays, complimented the roast, and commented on how lucky Thomas was to have me. Nothing ever went deeper than that. But everything changed the year she had the fall. It happened on a cold January morning, 5 years ago. She slipped in her conservatory, broke her hip, and the complications snowballed. Blood clots, then a stroke during surgery. By spring, she was bedridden. She couldn't walk, barely spoke, and needed round-the-clock care. The NHS did what it could, a few hours a week from carers, but not nearly enough. We sat around that long, silent table in her house in Surrey. Thomas, his sister Claire, their older brother Jonathan. All of us looking at each other, waiting for someone to say what we were all thinking. Claire had 3 kids and a full-time job in Leeds. Jonathan lived in New York and hadn't flown in except for the emergency. Thomas and I, well, we were only 20 minutes away. No children. I worked part-time as a librarian, and Thomas had a demanding role in finance. The assumption settled like fog. She'll need someone here every day, Jonathan had said, sipping from his overpriced coffee like this was a business briefing. Can we hire live-in help? Have you seen the cost? Claire shot back. We could rotate weekends, but daily care? That's too much. They all looked at me, then at Thomas. He didn't say a word. Just stared at his shoes. In that moment, I made a decision that would unravel my life, slowly and quietly, like wool from an old jumper. I'll do it, I said. I'll move in. I can't say I did it for Margaret. Not entirely. I did it because someone had to. I did it because I imagined if it were my own mother, I'd want someone to stay. I did it because no one else would. Within a month, I packed my things, books, clothes, my mother's teacups, and moved into the spare room of Margaret's 2-story house. I gave my notice at work. I told myself it would be temporary. A few months. Maybe a year. 5 years passed. Thomas came on weekends, sometimes. But mostly it was just me and Margaret, and her silence. She couldn't talk much, not clearly. A murmur here and there, a frown or wince if she was in pain. I learned her sounds like language, the difference between hungry, uncomfortable, cold. I became her body, in many ways. I washed her, fed her, turned her to avoid bedsores, changed her bedding, gave her medicine. I became her shadow. In the beginning, there were adjustments. I missed my home, my husband, my work. The library had been more than a job, it gave rhythm to my days, people to chat with, something of my own. All of that dissolved into adult nappies, porridge, and the rhythmic hum of the oxygen machine. Some nights, I cried in the kitchen, quietly, into a dish towel. I missed the smell of our house. The sound of Thomas brushing his teeth next to me. My old self, the woman who read novels and wore earrings and had plans. And yet, I stayed. The doctor told me once that most people last less than a year in these arrangements. Family burnout. But I couldn't walk away. It wasn't pride. It wasn't guilt. It was something harder to explain, a thread of duty spun tight around my ribs. There were no grand thank yous. Margaret wasn't capable of them anymore, I told myself. But once, after I trimmed her nails, she pressed her hand over mine and mumbled, "Good girl." And that was enough to carry me for months. Claire visited at Christmas. Jonathan sent flowers once, addressed to the house. Thomas came most Sundays, sitting beside her for an hour, updating her on the garden, then retreating to my room with me for tea. I stopped asking him to stay overnight. He said it felt like a hospital. Said he didn't want to remember his mum this way. I never told him how those words stung. That I was here every day, watching her fade, remembering her exactly this way, and somehow still showing up. By the 3rd year, my back ached constantly. My hair was going grey faster. I developed insomnia. My GP prescribed antidepressants, but I never filled the prescription. I didn't want to admit anything was wrong. Everyone had already forgotten me. I couldn't afford to forget myself too. Margaret's decline was slow. Some days, she was alert, almost present. Other days, I found her staring at the ceiling, eyes wet and distant. The silence between us grew companionable. I played her old music, Vera Lynn, Nat King Cole, and read from the Telegraph. When I brushed her hair, she sometimes closed her eyes and hummed. I told myself she appreciated it, in her own way. But even then, I was beginning to unravel. I could feel it in the way I started counting the minutes. The way I envied the delivery man's quick escape. The way I sometimes stared at my reflection and couldn't place the woman I'd become. Still, every morning I rose, brewed the tea, wiped her face, turned her gently, and whispered, "Good morning, Margaret." And she'd blink once. Or not at all. But I stayed. Because that's what you do when no one else will. Because that's what I promised myself I would do. Because somewhere in the haze of duty, I still believed it mattered. Each day began the same. At 6:30 a.m., the alarm on my phone vibrated softly beside me. I didn't need it, not really. Sleep was light and broken, my body tuned to Margaret's needs before my mind even caught up. I would lie there for a minute, staring at the ceiling, trying to summon the strength to sit up, plant my feet, and begin again. The first task was checking her. Was she breathing? Was the oxygen mask still secure? Did she seem comfortable? If she'd soiled herself in the night, I'd change her first. If not, I'd go make tea, strong black tea with 2 sugars, how she liked it before the stroke. Now it just dribbled down the side of her mouth, but I kept making it anyway. It felt wrong not to. Breakfast was a soft mix of oats and mashed banana. I'd spoon it in gently, one hand under her chin, catching anything that missed. Sometimes she turned her head away, sometimes she accepted it. On rare mornings, she'd open her eyes and say, which I decided to take as approval. After breakfast, I would lift her gently using the hoist system the council installed in year 2. Before that, I'd strained my back trying to move her alone. I learned to wash every part of her body without causing pain, how to towel dry her hair in sections, how to apply barrier cream to avoid sores. Mid-mornings were for meds, warfarin, a mild sedative, laxatives. Then the house would go quiet, save for the low hum of her breathing, the occasional creak of wood. I would sit in the lounge with a lukewarm cup of coffee, phone in hand, reading articles I barely absorbed, scrolling through photos of friends living lives so wildly different from mine that they didn't even feel real. The doorbell rang once a day, maybe. Groceries delivered. A carer from the agency who stayed 25 minutes tops, just enough to tick the box. If they were kind, they'd chat with me. If not, they did their duty and vanished. Lunch. Feeding. Changing pads. Checking skin. Repositioning. By mid-afternoon, the loneliness crept in like a fog. I kept the TV on in the background just for noise. Sometimes I read aloud to her from the paper. Once, I tried Jane Austen. She'd always loved persuasion. Her eyes didn't flicker. Still, I read until my throat ached. There were good days, or maybe not good, just less hard. When she would murmur something I could almost understand. When she didn't grimace with pain. When the sun lit the room just so, and for a second it felt like a home again, not a waiting room for death. But most days blurred into each other. Repetition wore at me. Not just the tasks, but the silence. The complete invisibility of it all. No one saw me. Thomas visited most Sundays. He brought flowers or books, sometimes stayed for dinner. But the space between us had grown wide and wordless. He never asked what my days were like. Once, when I tried to tell him how drained I was, he kissed my forehead and said, "You're amazing," like that closed the topic. It didn't. I stopped asking for help. It was easier to pretend I had it under control than to face the pity in their eyes. Claire called occasionally. "You're doing such a great job, Ellie. Truly." Then she'd go on about her daughter's dance recital, or how hard it was juggling everything. I nodded politely. Always politely. It was easier that way. By year 3, I began to resent the sound of the phone. It only ever brought reminders of the life I used to have, invitations I couldn't accept, conversations I couldn't keep up with, birthdays I'd forgotten. Sometimes, in the middle of brushing Margaret's teeth or changing her catheter bag, I'd pause and think, is this my whole life now? And then I'd feel shame for even asking. She didn't choose this. She hadn't asked for this either. But neither had I. Once, after a long day, I broke down in the laundry room. I sank to the floor, my hands still red from bleach, and sobbed quietly into the damp towels. I felt like a ghost, not alive, not dead, just caught in the in-between. But there were slivers of grace, too. One evening, as I tucked her in, she looked at me longer than usual. Her eyes, faded but alert, locked with mine. She whispered something that sounded like, "Stay." Just that one word. And I did. I sat by her bed until midnight, holding her hand, the lamp casting a warm yellow glow on her pale face. Those moments were rare, but I clung to them like lifebuoys. Some nights I wrote in a journal. Not poetic reflections, just lists, what she ate, what her temperature was, the number of pads used. I suppose I wanted proof of the work, of my presence. That I was here. I don't know if Margaret ever truly understood what I gave up. I don't know if it would have mattered. She never said thank you. Never apologized for the way her children vanished behind me. But I told myself that wasn't why I did it. I did it because someone had to. Because when a person loses everything, their voice, their dignity, their independence, someone must remain to witness their humanity. And somehow, I had become that someone. There were days when I forgot the sound of my own voice outside of care commands. I began talking to the cat that lingered in the garden. I watched the seasons change through the same narrow kitchen window. Life moved on outside while I stood still. Still, I rose each morning. Still, I bathed her. Still, I fed her. Still, I whispered, "Good morning, Margaret." Even when I no longer believed she heard me. Even when I barely believed I was still there. Because that's what love looks like when no one is watching. Because that's what sacrifice becomes when it outlives recognition. It was a Thursday afternoon, a quiet one. Late spring, the kind where the sun lingers longer than it should, warming up the corners of the house that had been cold for months. I'd just finished changing Margaret's bedding after a small accident. Her skin had been red again on her lower back. I'd applied cream, adjusted the cushions, propped her up a little, hoping it would help. She didn't say anything, she rarely did these days, but I hummed softly, something familiar, a lullaby my own mum used to sing. Afterwards, I made her some tea and left it beside her bed, though I doubted she'd drink it. I stepped out to the hallway and walked toward the back of the house to grab the folded laundry. That's when I heard her voice, faint, but unmistakably hers, from the open door of her room. Margaret. Talking. Actually talking. I froze. She was on the phone. Her mobile was on speaker. Someone had likely dialed and propped it against her chest. Her speech wasn't crisp, still slurred, but more coherent than I'd heard in months. I stepped closer, the laundry cradled in my arms, heart pounding. At first, I couldn't make out who she was speaking to. Then I heard the voice. Claire. Light, breezy, laughing at something. I couldn't believe she could even understand Margaret's speech that well. But somehow, they were managing. I should have walked away. Should have given her privacy. But something rooted me to the floor. Then I heard Margaret say, slowly, but clearly enough, she just does it because she has nothing better. No job. No life. Claire chuckled. Well, it's lucky for us, isn't it? And Margaret added, a free servant, really. Saves everyone else the trouble. The hallway fell silent around me. The folded towels in my arms suddenly felt like bricks. My ears rang. My knees wobbled. I backed away from the door, heartbeat thudding in my throat. A free servant. No life. Nothing better to do. I stumbled into the kitchen and leaned against the sink. I stared out at the garden, but I wasn't seeing anything. My breath came in shallow, sharp waves. I felt like someone had poured cold water down my spine. 5 years. 5 years I'd given her. My marriage had thinned out like cheap cloth. My friendships faded. My sense of self, my voice, my body, all changed. For her. And this was what she believed. That I had no life. That I was convenient. I don't know how long I stood there. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. Somewhere outside, a bird called once, then again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw a plate across the kitchen. I wanted to walk out the front door and never look back. But I didn't. Instead, I sank to the kitchen floor, the cool tile pressing against my legs, and I cried. But it wasn't like the quiet sobs I'd had before. This was different. This was grief. Grief for the part of me that had hoped, however naively, that somewhere in her silent stares or brief murmurs, there was gratitude. That I was seen. That I mattered. Instead, I was just the woman who had nothing better to do. I didn't eat dinner that night. I heated a tin of soup and left it untouched on the counter. I didn't go back into her room. I couldn't. Around 9:30 p.m., I stood in the hallway outside her door, staring at the crack of light spilling from beneath it. I pressed my hand against the wall, steadying myself, trying to breathe. She was asleep. Good. Because I didn't trust what I might say if she were awake. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled. My mind replayed the words over and over. A free servant. And Claire, her own daughter, had laughed. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret's face. Not the quiet, helpless version I'd come to know, but something colder, more calculating. I hated thinking of her that way. I hated the bitterness crawling up my throat. But it was there. And for the first time, I felt something else too, something sharper, darker. Resentment. Not the slow burn exhaustion I'd lived with for years, but a clean cut. A realization. That I wasn't doing something noble. I was doing something convenient. For everyone else. And they'd let me. They'd let me disappear into her care. And she'd let them. The next morning, I didn't say good morning, Margaret. I didn't hum while brushing her hair. I did the basics, fed her, changed her, repositioned her, but my eyes never met hers. My hands were mechanical. My voice, flat. She looked at me a few times, blinking. Maybe she noticed the shift. Maybe she didn't. I didn't care. Or at least, I told myself I didn't. Thomas called that afternoon. I didn't mention anything. What would be the point? I could already hear his voice. She didn't mean it, or worse, she's not fully herself. But she was herself enough to make that call. To say those words. To laugh. That weekend, Thomas didn't visit. That Sunday, Claire posted photos on Facebook, a family picnic in Yorkshire, all smiles and summer dresses. Margaret's name wasn't even mentioned. That's when it hit me. Not just the words I overheard. But the whole thing. The arrangement. The quiet erasure of my own life so others could carry on with theirs. Guilt-free. I wasn't angry at just Margaret anymore. I was angry at everyone. And for the first time since I moved in, I seriously considered walking away. Not forever. Just for a week. A few days. Just enough to breathe. To remember who I was before all of this. But I didn't leave. Not yet. Because I still hadn't decided what hurt more, her words, or the truth inside them. The next few days moved slowly, like walking waist deep through cold water. Every chore felt heavier. Every silence louder. I was still caring for her, still turning her gently, still preparing her meals, still brushing her hair back with practiced tenderness, but the rhythm had changed. Something inside me had gone quiet. Detached. I kept hearing the words. She just does it because she has nothing better to do. A free servant. Every time I reached for her slippers or changed her bedpan, the words echoed. Each repetition chipped away at something inside me. I didn't confront her. I thought about it, ran through the conversation in my head over and over. But what would I say? And would she even remember? Worse, would she deny it, smile that vacant smile and call me dramatic? I began doing the bare minimum. Not in neglect, but in efficiency. No longer singing softly as I wiped her face. No longer reading the paper aloud. I started leaving the room as soon as the task was done. That first Sunday, I told Thomas not to come. I just need a quiet day, I said. He didn't ask why. Didn't press. All right, love. Let me know if you need anything. That was it. It struck me how easily he accepted my retreat. As though my existence there had become a fixture, unexamined. Like the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, always present, always reliable, always taken for granted. I didn't cry after that day. Not like before. The grief was still there, but it calcified, hardened into a brittle kind of numbness. I stopped journaling. Stopped caring whether her children called or visited. I no longer updated Claire with her medical notes or emailed Jonathan about prescription costs. If they wanted to know, they could ask. But they didn't. It was the district nurse who first noticed the shift in me. "You all right, Eleanor?" she asked as I signed off on the weekly meds. "Fine," I said too quickly. She paused, then nodded, her eyes gentle. "You know, you're allowed to need things too." That sentence rattled in my head for days. One afternoon, while Margaret slept, I went for a walk, just 20 minutes, down the lane, past the hedges, toward the stream where the birds nested in spring. I hadn't done that in over a year. I felt like a fugitive, half expecting a neighbor to ask where I was going, why I wasn't inside. But no one stopped me. The sun was soft. The breeze warm. I sat on a bench and watched a father and daughter throw sticks into the water for their golden retriever. I had an ache in my chest that wasn't quite envy, but something close. Longing, maybe. Or regret. When I returned, Margaret hadn't moved. Her tea was cold. Her eyes closed. She didn't even know I'd left. And that was the moment I began to pull back inside myself. Not in anger, but in resignation. I started calling in the agency carers more often, even though they were expensive and unreliable. I just needed the space. I told Thomas. I told Claire. Neither protested. Maybe they knew better than to argue. Or maybe they were relieved they wouldn't be asked to step in themselves. One evening, I found myself standing in the doorway of her room, watching her breathe. She looked small. Frail. Not the sharp woman in pearls I met 15 years ago, but a shell of her. Her hands, once always moving with purpose, folding linen, slicing carrots, fixing necklaces, now lay curled and still on the blanket. I waited for something. Some flicker of apology. Some sign of recognition. Anything. But there was nothing. Just the rise and fall of her chest. The faint wheeze of her breath. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of wine. I hadn't done that in years. I sipped slowly, staring out at the garden I used to tend, once filled with lavender and snapdragons, now overgrown, wild. I thought about my mother, long gone now. I thought about how she used to say, "Don't let the good in you be wasted on people who can't see it." And I wondered, had I done just that? Wasted myself? No, not wasted. That's too harsh. But I had certainly given parts of myself away that would never come back. A few days later, I received a text from Claire. One sentence. "Let me know if you ever need a proper break, I'll try to sort something." I stared at it for 10 full minutes. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. Where would I go? Who would I be, outside of this house? That night, Margaret had a bad coughing fit. I sat beside her until it passed. Wiped her lips. Offered water she couldn't hold down. When she settled, I touched her forehead lightly. She blinked, slowly. Then her lips parted. I leaned closer. "Sorry," she rasped, barely a whisper. I froze. It was faint. Maybe imagined. Maybe just a breath. But I held on to it like a lifeline. "Did you say something?" I asked gently. She closed her eyes. Silence. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was everything I'd been waiting to hear. I didn't forgive her in that moment. Not fully. But I felt something loosen in my chest. Just slightly. I walked back to my room and sat on the bed. The moonlight spilled in across the floor, catching on a pair of folded socks. I felt the weight of 5 years behind me and the uncertain stretch of time ahead. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel entirely alone. And that had to be enough, for now. My name is Eleanor, and I am 42 years old. 5 years ago, I stepped into a role that reshaped my entire world. Today, I look back on those years with a bittersweet clarity that only time and pain can provide. I have not fully forgiven Margaret for what she said. I'm honest enough to admit that. The sting of betrayal still lingers, an ache beneath the surface, a shadow I carry. But I understand now that she was trapped too, lost in the same prison her body had become. Her words, though cruel, were perhaps a reflection of her frustration, her fear, and the helplessness she felt. I do not regret caring for her. Not truly. Despite everything, despite the heartbreak, I would not erase those years from my life. Because in those moments of care, in the quiet mornings when her eyes met mine briefly, in the rare times when she whispered a word or two, I learned something profound about resilience, about sacrifice, and about the fragility of love. But I do regret losing myself along the way. The parts of me that faded into the background while I was consumed by her needs. The friendships I let wither, the career I abandoned, the dreams I shelved indefinitely. I regret not setting boundaries sooner, not asking for more help, and not taking moments for myself without guilt. If I could go back, I would tell that younger Eleanor to remember that her life matters too. To say no when necessary, to rest when needed, to seek support without shame. Because caregiving, no matter how noble, is not sustainable without care for oneself. To anyone listening who is in a similar position, I want you to know this. You are not invisible. Your worth is not measured by how much you give up. It's okay to feel exhausted, to feel resentment, even anger. These feelings don't make you a bad person, they make you human. Set your boundaries. Find your moments of peace. Hold on to your identity, even when the days feel endless and the nights lonelier still. And remember that love is complicated. It's not always gentle or kind, but it is powerful in ways that are hard to explain. I'm still learning what it means to live again beyond caregiving, to rebuild a sense of self that doesn't revolve around sacrifice alone. Some days are harder than others. But the pain has taught me strength, and that maybe, just maybe, there is life after the storm. Because if there's one thing I've come to understand, it's that even broken things can find a way to heal. What I've learned, most of all, is that caregiving is a profound act of love, but it can't come at the cost of losing yourself. We must remember to care for our own hearts while tending to others. It's okay to ask for help, to take breaks, and to acknowledge when the burden is too much. Holding on to your own identity and boundaries doesn't diminish your compassion, it strengthens it. To anyone walking this path, you are not alone. Your feelings are valid, your efforts are heroic,